Uh, yes. Okay. So, um, I think one of the first questions is, first of all, I'll let you know that you are the sixth person I'm interviewing. We're in like phase one of the interviews. You're number six that I'm interviewing. We kind of already talked about the last time I saw you, which is at the Barnes Gala, most likely in real life, that is,
Yeah.
because some of the folks that I was interviewing, I hadn't seen in ages, it felt like,
Mhm.
and sometimes an obligatory catch up is required before you kind of get down to
Mhm.
business. But anyway, um, I guess one of the first questions is, what was your last in real life experience in an art space that was memorable, and why? Like any kind of
Ooh.
space. And it could be like, doesn't have to be about art, it could be about history, but any kind of exhibition space that you've been in that that resonated with you for whatever reason.
Oh man, I'm trying to draw on something. I mean, there are a couple of things I feel like I'm excited because I was part of something where an interview where we're asking some folks this question, and
Mhm.
two of the folks said that they hadn't been anywhere since the pandemic, and I was like, oh, I've actually kept sort of an art scene practice through the pandemic, which I was sort of excited about, and
Yeah.
realized that was something special. Um, I think a couple of things are coming to mind. I mean, one of the last performances I saw was by a Black queer artist named Shaquille Casey, and he is primarily, well, his practice started with photography and has moved into other areas, and so he did a project. I should reference if this is going to be recorded and and
No, that's
shared.
fine. And this is a perfect example that, like,
Yes, I'm like,
you
oh, I should
know,
actually have the title of this work correct if it's going to
no,
pop
I
up.
love it, because what I will say is that I'm asking folks for recommendations at the end, or even if it's like an artist comes up and you don't know it, you can always email me after the interview to say, hey, this is the artist I meant. And so that's fine. But yeah, any kind of references are great, because somehow we're gonna make some sort of creative documentation of the interviews, like presenting
Hmm.
this research in a public facing way that
Yeah,
hopefully has some kind of art element to it. But
yeah,
even these references and resources that you're listing will probably find their way into that documentation too. So thank you.
absolutely. So yeah, as Shaquille Casey actually born, or at least has roots here in Philadelphia,
Oh,
teaches in Pittsburgh, was part of the 2021 Performa Biennial, and performed as a really organized a really gorgeous, I think they were calling it an opera on the beach, with sort of Black vocalists, really compelling stage
wow.
dancers, movement, and the documentation from it was just incredible. So I think it was sort of this abstract space, this really beautiful space
You
that,
attended it in person?
yeah, it was at it
You
was,
said at a beach?
yeah,
Wow.
one of the beaches in New York. I'm trying to pull this up now. Oh yeah, Rockaway Beach,
Wow.
In Queens, New York. It was just incredible, and I that was in October that I saw that work. There's
That's
another
amazing.
time I was thinking that I was moved, and this would have been at the African American Museum. It's just sort of coming to me, and I want to get this artist name right. I believe Carter. Yes, Regina Carter, who's a violinist, I believe a MacArthur winning artist. And so, just sort of at
Wow.
the top tier of her craft, was working with Sonia Clark during that exhibition. And of course, a lot of Sonia Clark's practice is around hair. And so Regina Carter took a bow. Well, actually, I believe it would have been Sonia Clark who took a bow from a violin and strung it with a dreadlock, so with black hair. And then Regina Carter, this award-winning violinist, played
What?
the which I believe would have been the Black national anthem on that violin, if I'm remembering this performance right. I'm forgetting the song a little bit, but I remember the way that felt in my
I mean,
bones.
lift every voice and sing?
Yeah, we're talking about Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Oh, what?
I believe that's the song. I might there's like a 2% chance I might have the song wrong, but what I do
But it
remember
was
is like
some blackified like that.
they called it like the sound of the ancestors, right? And it was like this haunting,
Oh,
gorgeous chorus. It sort of, it sort of contained multiple pitches and a lot of dissonance, and it was
wow.
haunting, and it was like musical, but it was abstraction, and it
And that was
I
at AMP.
it was that amp, and it sort of just sits in my bones. It's one of the things that I just will
Wow.
never forget. Sometimes you forget nuance of work, but you don't
Yeah,
forget how you feel in a space or how it work. Like the
right.
song is not as clear to me as the feeling
Is the
of watching
feeling.
that
No, look.
performance.
I'm like that. I'm like that too, where people always ask, well, what was it like? They want certain details, but sometimes all you can remember is that feeling, and that's what makes
Yeah,
it memorable because it is
absolutely.
that aesthetic kind of experience that really transcends words. Sometimes it's just more
Hmm.
about how you're feeling. So that's powerful. But what I'm noticing about the things you mentioned, it sounds like they both had musical elements.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
wondering, that has come up in the conversations I've had with folks so far is that, it seems like an exhibition space of the future is not just going to be one where you're presenting visual works, two-dimensional or even three-dimensional works, but even about multimedia works, and also thinking about performance and music and how that, dedicated space could be reserved and planned and designed for that purpose. So those were both interesting and make me want to look it up to be like, yeah, like especially like you said, the documentation too,
Yeah.
which is also so key, which has come up as well in the sense that in this day and age, when we like the audience experience is very different. We're not assembling in crowds right now.
Yeah.
And so not everybody, and also we're not leaving our homes in the same ways and in the
Hmm.
frequency and the comfort that we used to.
Hmm.
So missing out on art is something that is going to happen. And if you can't be there, how can we still have that art reach and even impact others that might not attend IRL? You know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
and so
Well,
that's important, right? That
yeah, and
documentation.
yeah, and it even speaks to the ability to create community across sort of geographical barriers. And so I think
Yeah.
that has been one of the gifts of this moment of COVID is that, organizations, if they were able to sort of see their way through this move into virtual space, can find themselves in front of audiences that they probably would have not been able to reach or even be considered by. And so I definitely think that there are ways that we can embrace that technological sort of versatility in
Right.
crafting a space that is a gallery but not a gallery.
Right. And in this moment, I'm just like called to say, because he just came to my mind, I was thinking about Greg Tate, brother Greg
Hmm.
Tate, who we lost. But if it wasn't
Yeah,
for you and AMP, because it was through that Parables of Corona event that
yeah,
um, was supposed to be live, but
yep.
then we had to switch gears
Oh
last
yeah,
minute
oh yeah.
to make it on Zoom. And the fact that, there were people that were able to attend, and even the fact that Greg was able to be there, you know what I mean? And be present from New York,
Hmm.
and just thinking about, and that's not even far. I mean, Philly and New York are close, but this idea that this digital presentation and virtual platforms are allowing us to, like you said, reach audiences we would have never been able to reach before.
Yeah.
And there's so many pros to that, so
I,
many
th- I
positive things.
And I think you taught me something in that event, which was the range of possibilities in that work. I felt like I was coming from it with a very sort of talking heads. Let's have a moderator and a couple folks, and the way you sort of introduced the zine and the way you introduced the playlist, and you just gave it a texture. And I reference that a lot. When I talk about
Oh,
sort of
thanks.
the possibility of collaborating with an artist, and like an artist never fails to open up sort of possibilities that were always possibilities but were
Right,
unseen. And so
right.
this also happened. I think another program I'm thinking about is we partnered with the Philadelphia Inquirer and journalist Cassie Owens, who had written a piece and produced a short film project about Black mourning and grief and the loss of sort of Black funeral traditions as part
Hmm.
of COVID.
Wow.
So we brought together epidemiologists and Cassie and a few other folks. But the epidemiologist in particular was really interesting because she was from New Orleans, and we closed out this talk with sort of a virtual second line. And so she sort of explained what
Oh,
a second line
wow.
was and invited us to close our eyes, to hold our transition loved ones close. And she walked
Wow.
us along a second line, hear the music, think of one place that your person would have gone to, walk by that place. And then she took us
Wow.
to another place. And I mean, at the end, I
Oh,
imagine,
wow.
just weeping on, I like, again,
I'm
you want
even
to talk
getting
about a
chills right
feeling.
now. I
But
know.
want to talk about a feeling. I sort of feel like I could cry right now, sort of retelling this story. And so maybe that's something
Yes.
that I'm
Wow.
recognizing and hearing in my own voice. It's just like you hold on to that feeling and you could just
You hold
sort of
on
call
to
it
it.
up when you need it.
You do. You got to like tap back into that. But that's really amazing because, like you said, I mean, a lot of us were kind of getting over the Zoom and the digital presentations at one point, but it's
Yeah.
like, you got to, we're here. It's going to have to happen. And what we're understanding too is that there may be an ebb and flow of like seasons in which we are doing the real life thing out in the world, but then retreating back to these virtual platforms because
Mhm.
that's the safest place to be for a moment.
Yeah.
But, the idea that, how can we make these platforms work for us? How can we, push the envelope and, expand our possibilities within this realm, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But like you said, beyond the talking heads. So that's great. I feel good about that too, because I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew that I was so excited about the real life presentation. And
Mhm.
I was like, and there were so many corners that we were going to have to cut that I was like, wait,
Yeah.
we got to try to keep something fun. We got to try to keep something interactive, how can we make that so yeah, that was definitely an experiment. But okay, so we're gonna move on. We're kind of
Okay.
warmed up. That you got me
Sure.
definitely in the zone. So I feel like
Let's do it.
we can move on to some of these like bio-based questions, and you can just share who you are, your name, your titles, and where you're from, but also
Mhm.
maybe where you're calling in from. When I say calling, you know what I mean, where you are
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. Well, hey, my name is James Claiborne. Professionally, I'm curator of public programs at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That is also my hometown, my place of birth, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Was born and raised in West Oak Lane. I now reside, proud homeowner in South Philly, Point Breeze. So I'm Philly through and through. I've done several things here in our cultural community. I sort of cut my teeth. I cut my teeth as a artist. A lot of folks don't remember the time when I was on stages and doing open mics and all these things.
That's
and
right.
and art shows and hair shops and little boutique galleries. But now I sort of have moved into the nonprofit sphere and the museum sphere. The position I had before this was director of programming and also public programming manager at a great place, the African American Museum in Philadelphia.
Right on. That's right. We both share that history. I've
I
been
know,
there
I was like,
too.
that's shared history between us.
Right. We've done that. We've done that. And
Mhm.
you've also done some in the cultural tourism, like the marketing, right?
Yeah,
With
absolutely. I
that,
was,
which I think that really is so important right now with the arts, because you got to have that background. We got to be able to know how to promote these things
yeah,
and get the word out.
and it served me well, certainly during my time at AMP, where we had less marketing resources. It was really nice to be able to call on sort of that skill set. But yeah, I was at Visit Philadelphia for a while as editor of their African American campaign, Philly360.com, and I did
Right.
some writing for You Wish You Knew for a bit as well.
Oh, right. You wish you knew, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've done a lot of things, James. And but also, I mean, you're a very accomplished independent curator. You've done a lot of independent projects.
Yeah, I do a lot on the side, or I did a lot on the side. I feel like sort of to build the world I now enjoy. I just said yes to a lot of projects and opportunities. And so I was on the board of Art Sanctuary, a small Black nonprofit here in Philadelphia for many years. I serve on the board of the Philadelphia Cultural Fund, which of course is the vehicle that distributes city funding to arts organizations. And sort of through that independent exploration, I had opportunity to one, start the gallery program at Art Sanctuary alongside our then executive director and my now boss, Val Gay, here at the Barnes Foundation. We had some history at the at Art Sanctuary and collectively started a gallery program there, which was exciting. We sort of went from posters on the wall to a Barclay Hendricks exhibition in about 18 months. Learned a lot
Right? You see
along the
my
way.
Barclay in the background. You
I
see?
see the Barclay in the background. I appreciate the
Oh,
Barclay.
oh,
And
Lottie Mama, I'm so excited. Like that came from the Studio Museum. One of their,
Mhm.
I guess one of their sales they had. I was so glad to get it. But yes, I mean, and that's so amazing because you have been a part of spaces that, you know, kind of began from an idea, like from
Mhm.
conception to execution. You've been a
Yeah.
part of that process. So I'm so glad to have you here with us and sharing your insights on all the things you mentioned, you know. That's amazing. So one of the first questions, just to let you know, I think I sent the initial kind of broad stroke questions, which
Mhm.
were, how do we create a gallery that holds space for the past, present, and future?
Yep.
And that's, you know, that's a very open-ended question. You can answer it, you know, 6 ways to Sunday, as folks in Philly seem to say.
Mhm.
But is that a Philly saying? I think, I don't know where I got that from.
I don't know, but it's resonating with me.
Yeah. So, you know, in thinking about that, I kind of talked about that in the beginning when we were chatting, is about the fact that, you know, the village has been around for 30 plus years.
Mhm.
And in thinking about the next 30 years, the next 50 years even, and all the change that we've experienced, just even in the last 2 years, you
Mhm.
know, and all the adjustments, all of the loss, all of the challenges, you know, and the shape shifting that art spaces have had to do in the
Mhm.
light of the pandemic, in the light of racial injustice, of climate change, like you
Mhm.
name it, you know, all the things. And then economic problems, right? I mean, we've had, you know, all kinds of issues going on with the economy. So I think that when we're asking this question about past, present, and future, um, it is something that I think you have experience with because of AMP, right? For example, we both know that AMP, you know, it's a history museum. A lot of what they are sharing and exhibiting with the public is works that explore our past, right?
Mhm.
And then also you recognize too, I'm sure that, you know, places like that have also been faced with challenges in terms of how do you keep the history fresh? You
Mhm.
know, how do we keep the past still interesting to new generations, you
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
And so the village, as you probably also know, is very much dedicated to their surrounding community.
Mhm.
So the things that they may think about in terms of history and archiving are much about their neighborhood, you know, in North Philly, and much about Philly in general, but also thinking about the world, you know? So kind of back to that question, how would you imagine a space that is going to be able to achieve this, kind of holding the past, present, and the future under one roof? Because they seem like they require different things.
Yeah, I don't know whether I think they require different things, and I think it's interesting that you referred to AMP as like a history museum, and I feel like we often, at least in my era of the museum, sort of
Right.
talked about holding, you know, art, history, and culture as the three pillars of our institution, and and I found, you know, I'm thinking about how I don't know, some folks are really willing to embrace that and some sort of resisted that. And so
Mhm.
I think perhaps I'm looking at past, present, as future and future as being more related than distant. And thinking about what's which I think is sort of to me is coming back to some of the principles and some of what I enjoy doing Black programming. I won't take credit for this thought, but I was talking with just a beautiful artist, Jermaine Ingram, one day when we
Oh
were
yeah.
doing some work around Fahamu Puku and Yoruba, and so I was just sort of, I don't know, walking the galleries, talking with Jermaine. I just really loved the way that she talked about Yoruba as a Black technology that sort of lands somewhere and responds to what the surroundings are. And of course, we know that will bring us things like in Cuba, Santeria. I imagine that, that Blackness has a similar sort of dexterity, adaptability,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering how that sort of, I feel like that the past, the present, and the future sort of are within Black work are always sort of popping up and referencing each other and pulling each other. The
Yeah.
future sort of uncovers new possibilities in the past or new ways of looking at the past. Um, so I think Blackness sort of to me is like the key to holding all
Yeah.
these areas, and art. I feel like art, a lot of the artists we are dealing with are, as much as they're looking toward the future, they're always sort of uncovering and rewriting stories or uncovering stories. And so I feel like it's the role of the artist to sort of help prepare the artist and the institution and the communion between them, to sort
Yeah.
of uncover sort of that gradient, and I think it's important to show these things as not being as distinct as we think they are,
Right.
because I think that is because I think that does the bridging with the audiences as well. Like I
Yeah.
certainly a lot of our younger generations are looking toward art that would appear to be within the future, but I mean, you
Right.
are Afrofuturistic. They are some of the most like hardcore historians you will ever encounter.
Well,
Um,
exactly. Exactly. That Afrofuturism does that work. It reaches back, like uses that
yeah,
principle of Sankofa and
yes.
relies on the past to build the future. But you know what? I guess maybe for me, because you made a really great point, James, and I think that I'm coming from my own shortcomings, for example, with technology,
Hmm.
as we kind of talked about at the top of this call, is that like, you
Like I'm
know,
losing ground every day.
yeah, that's how I feel sometimes. And I wonder that like when it comes to the art of the future, um, if you're not versed or knowledgeable in say NFTs or the digital new media,
Hmm.
artworks and things, and where maybe the future is taking some of the art, right? I
Hmm.
believe there's always going to be multiple disciplines, and folks are always going to keep things like some assemblage of tradition is still going to
Hmm.
be present even in the future, but wondering like if you know I don't know, like there's a generation of curators that's going to also have to figure out how to present works that these new artists are coming up with, because artists are always kind of at the forefront, and maybe they beat us to that front line where
Hmm.
that technology might not the technology that they're using to create their art may not have met its match yet in terms of how the art should be presented. And so thinking about how spaces have had to adjust that don't always have those capabilities, because even with the pandemic, for example, there were a lot of institutions that were kind of resting on their laurels when it came to changing with the times, and they were
Hmm.
blindsided
Hmm.
because they didn't have the technology to do some of these Zoom things, or they didn't, know how to switch gears and do more of virtual programming or make
Yeah.
offerings that audiences could easily consume. And immediately they had to actually take a pause and then rebuild a little bit, and
Hmm.
reconfigure in order to keep up with the times.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, you're right. I don't know. I feel like if you're in the waters, if you're in the dialogue, and if you're in the struggle, the stream, whatever you sort of want to talk
Yeah.
about it in the conversation, really, I remember that moment happening at the African American Museum, and it was like we have to move virtual, and At the time, I think I sort of was mildly resistant because I wanted to gather more information. Like
Right,
I really wanted to understand the long implication of COVID, which, in
right,
hindsight, there's no way that we could have known March 2020 what these sort of next 2 years would look like. And so I was sort of grateful in hindsight, or sort of annoyed at the front end, but grateful in the back end that the institution was sort of eager, ready to jump in the water, and perhaps did so sometimes, uh, and allowed ourselves to figure some things out in the
yep,
doing. And I think that is another piece of this for me, which is, sometimes with a piece of artwork, um, you don't understand its fullest sort of possibilities, potential to speak to you or your audience until you get to the other side of it. And so sometimes it's about, to me, being sort of informed, being in spaces and with people that you trust,
right,
and giving yourselves room and permission to I don't know, to be experimental and to enter a scenario and perhaps have a couple more questions than you have answers. I
yeah,
always feel like that is I value when I'm in those spaces where you get to have spaces for inquiry and spaces
yeah,
for exploration, because I feel like it makes the next project smarter. And yeah, and back to the point of talking about working with you in an earlier project, it was, some things at the other end of a project, and sometimes,
right,
yeah, and that possibility is only created and sort of cemented as a possibility by going through. And I had to, and if I think about that project, it was like there was a lot of trust there, right?
right,
And sometimes that's person to person trust, or
right.
institution to
We're like, we
institution
don't
trust.
know. Yeah, we're just
I'm like, I
hoping for
wasn't
the
thinking
best.
about it this way, but you know what? Actually, I really trust what Lee is saying here, and I think I'll understand it a lot clearer when we get to the other side. And
When
and
we get to the, no, I appreciate that because you were like, oh, that's what you're trying to do. Like it wasn't something that felt necessarily intuitive to the situation.
hmm
We felt like we could have done it one way, and that would have been maybe the easiest way, but the other way made it, I think, more enjoyable for all, including
hmm
the audience and myself. Like, yeah, and it was an experiment, and you find out on the other side. And like you said, it's about learning, and it's
yeah.
about applying that information. And that's really what this process is about. Like, we're trying to learn from other people's experiences and apply that. Because I should say this too, is that this information is really going to be used by the community,
hmm
first and foremost, because the community are the ones, the immediate folks that are connected to the village and have been connected to the village, are going to be the ones that are the stewards of the space.
hmm
And for that reason, this information, the research will be then shared with them and then hopefully applied in a way that will become reality in the physical,
Yeah.
and also through the programming, right? And through
Yeah.
the programming as well. Um, oh,
Can I?
no, go ahead.
I was also sort of thinking about past, present, and future uh, in terms of like one. I was thinking in terms of documentation. I feel like Philly has such a special story. I think
Yeah,
about just the proximity that we enjoy to folks like Richard Watson and Betty Lee Craft and Brenda Dixon Gottschalk, like just genius titans who in many ways kick down doors so that we can enjoy sort of the worlds that we occupy now.
right.
So I think a lot about, that's just the artistic side. We haven't talked about activism and community or everyday stories. And so to me there is sort of a I don't know, equitable conversation about who gets to be remembered. And I
Right.
feel like spaces like the gallery you're talking about, the gallery that's not a gallery, you're talking about, I don't know, that sort of access and who has the privilege to be, showcased and remembered. I think that's
Mhm.
something that becomes important in gallery shows. It's like a documentation that I was here in this particular moment doing this thing, or this particular
Right.
moment existed. And perhaps, some I don't know, a way that we are equitable in that, or intergenerational in that, drawing parallels between, I don't know, communities, practice, creating intergenerational links. I
Yes.
feel like those are sort of things that create those opportunities. So I don't know. I think a lot about, I enjoy so much time with some really gorgeous elders, and I cherish like
Yes.
every single conversation. And like, at moments you want to record a conversation, or you
I
just want to
know it.
hold it, or just like, oh, everyone needs to know this little bit of
Needs to know
history.
this.
And,
Yeah.
and so I don't know. I think there could be a way that this gallery, as a repository of stories and a repository of, who has been and who will be, might be interesting.
I love that, James. I love it. And it's so right in line with what others have shared in terms of this idea of how we hold these stories and remember is through our elders, and this intergenerational component, which has always been something that's, I think, at the center of how the village does things and how they
Hmm.
build community. It's always been intergenerationally.
Yeah.
And I think that that is also about access. You talked about access, and that's a big concern, in terms of concern, or a goal, rather, is to make sure that this space is extremely accessible
Hmm.
to the immediate community, but then also that it has that feeling of, the things that so many institutions, I think, are trying to remedy now, is this idea of how intimidating the brick and mortar facades of certain, like, pillar institutions in the arts, whether it's the Met or the PMA, or in the Barnes, or wherever, but this
Hmm.
idea that, is this space for us, do we belong here? Are we welcomed here? And also not just about the invitation, but also about the ticket price, this idea that how much it costs to even enter a space as an adult. I mean, it's, you kids
Hmm.
get discounts, there's always pay what you wish, but this idea that, there's certain borders, certain walls that can go up to prevent folks from really claiming a space as their own.
Hmm.
And you mentioned the church earlier, but someone, I can't remember who, but someone mentioned this idea of church. Like, when a church belongs to you, when you attend a church, you call it my church,
Hmm.
And I loved how, I think it was Siobhan maybe who said that, but this idea that, um, do we ever call a museum our museum, or our space, or our art space? We want to kind of make sure that people feel that comfortable, feel that that is
Hmm.
something that belongs to them, and that it's theirs to live and grow and experience life. Because there's so many things, I think, that a lot of art spaces in this time of crisis with the pandemic, and even like with the BLM uprising, right? When we had the whole thing happen over the summertime.
Hmm.
And when you think about how a lot of the meeting places for protests were art spaces, a lot of times people would gather to kind of strategize, have community conversations, and
Hmm.
figure out what the heck was going on in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that, as you were talking about the elders and the intergenerational piece, it's like this idea that this space is going to be a space of healing, of gathering, of conversation, and connection. That's
Hmm.
something that the village definitely wants to build into that space. And can you think of any places that you've attended or been, whether Philly or beyond, that actually held space for either ritual or gathering or healing in some kind of way within an art space? Or maybe not an art space, but a space that you felt was for the community.
Yeah, I would need to do some thinking about that.
Yeah.
I feel like we, at moments within my work at AMP, had um permission to go there, or sometime it was a way that we that we thought about programming. And so, I can recall programs where we poured libation, where we had blessings. I think probably in times that predated me, probably wouldn't be unusual to find someone, at the right program, the opening with a little prayer or something,
Right,
like
right.
but so
Camp is good for that.
yeah, it was. So I sort of feel like that AMP had sort of that inclination. It wasn't always institutionalized though, right? And because
Right.
you're still operating within, I don't know, nonprofit structures that look to best practices from corporate sort of worlds. And so, but I think it could be interesting to. I was just doing some reading about like Black research methodology, and one of the things in like Afrocentric research methodology, they were sort of talking about the value of spirit,
Mhm.
and that within sort of, and so I sort of took permission to take that outside of just research methodology, but the way we build our institutions, and like,
Yeah.
should we as Black folk who are building institutions for future generations of Black folks, like how radical is it to institutionalized spirit, because it's such a big way that we communicate, and what does that look like? I don't know that
Yeah.
any of us have ever been given permission to do that sort of deep sort of exploration or evaluation of spirit,
Wow.
because oftentimes the way that we measure the quality of our work are quantitative, because that's the way we have to talk about it in the grant, even if it's qualitative with the story. We're not concerned about people's sort of like spiritual well-being. And I'm like,
Yeah.
would it be radical, and like would it and appropriately radical for us to consider spirit as a way to build healthy Black communities? And I think that's what
Woo.
this sort of research methodology is sort of guiding me towards. And it's like, it also says something else in this book, and I have to pull the quote for you and send it your way. It's like
Yes.
everything that's valued can't be measured. And I'm like, oh, we are always sort of like
That's beautiful.
quantifying our work by measurables and by
Right.
analytics,
Measurable
like,
outcomes and whatnot,
which is smart. We need that language, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes
we
just to
do.
access capital, but we also need, we have our own unique skill sets and ways of moving in the world. And what
Yeah.
could it be like to bring that into the building of an institution or a space?
Oh, yeah, you come with these gems tonight, James. See what happens at the end of the
Uh,
day? Sometimes
oh,
that magic happens at the end of the day. We both were like, what?
it was all the
But
soda I drank today.
look, I know we got to get through every how we can. I got two
Hmm.
cups of coffee here. But the thing too, that brings back to what you said from the very beginning when you're sharing one of the experiences that resonated with you and why. And the fact that like you couldn't remember all the details, but it was the feeling, and that's spirit, right?
Hmm.
Isn't that spirit like when you are touched in that way, and when you're moved and you get emotional like
Hmm.
that is the spirit moving through you, the
Yeah.
human spirit, the creative spirit, whatever, the ancestors. And I love that, but you're right. It is because some people feel some type of way about bringing like spirit into, a space that might be an institutional space,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's like, we're kind of in a triage, like survival moment where like we kind of got to get it wherever we can. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and let people approach it the way that they need to. I think the problem
Yeah.
is we try to define and box in spirit, and try to draw lines always between religion and spirit. And I think
Right.
that we're talking about something different. I think the church that I last attended, or maybe the one before last, the Baptist church I grew up in, I think the pastor used to describe spirit as like the seat of your emotion and your intellect. And
Oh,
so I think
really?
that's something interesting. Is like, oh, how can we create a really broad, wide open door for spirit so that almost anybody can walk through it? And I think that, I think that has been something that I think was
Oh,
core to some of the work I did, especially at the African American Museum. I think you have to approach it with its sort of broadest meaning and intent, and let people sort of hang on to what they want, and if they don't want to hang on to something, create a space where, where, I don't know, they can, you take what you need almost.
Yes. No, oh my
Bring
God, I love it.
bring what you
I'm
have, take what
inspired
you
right
need.
now. I am. You're giving me life because if this is where the arts are headed, through folks like you who are thinking this way, that's definitely inspiring, because it can go in a lot of different directions, but that's one direction I would not mind seeing it go for sure. One of the things I want to do though, because I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to get to some of these more logistical questions,
Sure.
and then we're going to wrap it up with some kind of speculative questions, just kind of for fun. Thinking about sci-fi and Afrofuturism. I've been having some fun with some folks thinking about what the future tomorrow might look like, right? And how we might
Hmm.
situate space within it. But thinking about programming, right? As a curator, these are just kind of like more quantitative, like in terms of
Hmm.
time. How long does it generally take you to conceive an exhibition from start to finish? Like from the time you conceive of the idea to your research and development to the execution and presentation of the show.
I think there are a lot of answers to this question. I think that I was talking about one of my colleagues today, to Jay Duckett, who's the director of
Mhm.
curatorial services at AMP, like curator with a capital C,
Yeah,
can do the long road of, multi-year sort of
right.
engagement, the fundraising, the idea, I think there's a lot of answers to that question.
Mhm.
And so I think on one spectrum, I think of Jay as being, just a tried and true curator, like a museum professional. I like to
Yeah.
think of myself as something, I don't know, a little bit more rogue. And and like I've been
I would say you could check that box for sure.
and so I don't, I for some things we did with if I think about Art Sanctuary as a space, there are moments that I think we were working within a 6-month window. If I think about, the show we did with Barkley Hendricks, we probably produced that show in a 6-month window in terms of having our first conversation, sourcing sort of the resources, lining
Right.
up the scholars to do the writing. That probably was about a 6-month window.
And
Um,
that's a solo artist, which is a
yeah,
different kind of project than
yeah,
group show, which is
yeah.
yeah.
But I've been part of group shows that do a call 3 months out and, have a
And boom.
juror and then, people deliver work in a week or so and then your show opens. So I think,
Right.
I don't know. I think it depends on the idea and how much you need development. If you need a lot of time to do
Right.
research and to look through archives and to write labels and essays.
And also the programming, I imagine, because I'm thinking that one of the things that might determine your time frame is how robust is your programming associated with the show? How much, for example, too, like, are you doing a catalog, right?
Yeah,
Is there going to be documentation around the catalog? Because I know those can take time. Do you
yeah.
typically have some sort of documentation for the exhibitions that you've produced?
Again, I've done a lot of sort of I hate to call them scrappy is the word that pops into my mind.
Scrappy is a
But
good word. I have no problem with the word
I
scrappy.
know,
Don't
but like
care.
this will be recorded and potentially listened to and shared. So like
Right, that's true.
like whoever is doing the editing, I do not want to talk about my work because some of it has been really stellar and scrappy. But
Right, of course.
there are things that have been had more dexterity or flexibility that have been more. I've been thinking a lot about the role of improvisation within the institution.
Yeah,
Being within a big institution now and leaving a smaller organization where I felt like you had a lot more improvisational language programmatically.
yeah,
I'm wondering how you transfer that sort of skill set or impulse into a big ship like the one I occupy now.
yeah,
And so I don't know. So like for improvisational, responsive programming, I don't know. Sometimes, those ideas come together in 4 weeks and 6 weeks. Ideally, you're working things, 2, 3,
right.
6 months in advance programmatically. But,
Is that ideal? When you say ideal, like, do you prefer to have a little more time, or you kind of okay with like flying with whatever works in the moment?
I like a little bit of both. I
Yeah,
do enjoy sort of, and I feel like having a long game allows you to be sort of responsive and reactive, and so you might say, a lot of these ideas come from the community, and so occasionally you're in a place where you really love a project, love an artist, and can't take it on for the sake of, I'm trying to lay out a calendar year of programming that would
right,
allow me to be reactive and responsive and to be able to take on a project like this, 6 months, 9 months down the road.
right.
So I feel like, one allows for the other,
Sure.
that project I talked about with Cassie Owens and the Inquirer was something that, she kind of brought my way at the perfect moment,
At the
with
right
the
time.
perfect sort of partnership, and it just made sense. Other
Yeah.
things are longer projects. I like both. I honestly, I really like both.
Yeah, but that's great to have that flexibility, and that comes from you being an artist yourself, I think,
Hmm.
James. Because you have this creativity that allows for you to, like you said, respond in the moment and work with whatever you got. Right? If you got a long span of time, if it's a short span of time, partners or no partners, you figure it out and make it work. And I think that's part of your strength as a curator. I've seen it. I've seen it in action.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's also has to do bringing back the blackness. I think like blackness is like, I don't know. It's just I think it is a way of keeping the long road and sort of the long journey and the big goals ahead, but also just being able to be responsive in a moment and to see the possibilities within sort of raw materials. And sometimes that's just, time on a calendar and
yes,
artists you want to work with. So I think there's something sort of inherently black about that model too that I
it
sort of
is. It
enjoy. But
is.
you have to be careful. It can run, it can run you. You don't want to be
Right.
too far. Like if it's and that happens really quick where you look up and suddenly you are a lot more responsive short term than you are long term, and it can
Right.
take a while to work your way back into a balance. So that's
Not about
something
to say
I
the
think a
word
lot
balance.
about.
No, exactly. I was just about to say the balance. I think
Hmm.
balance is key because you're right. Like that can work well in certain instances, but there's got to be some balance.
Yeah.
That's great. I love those thoughts that you're sharing. Um, so the last two questions kind of in this section before we wrap it up,
Hmm.
the first one, the next one is about audience, and the other is about staffing. So let's talk about audience, this idea of how in the future, even in the now, thinking about now, how our audiences have changed, right? We talked about it already in the sense that, folks have gone digital, which means that your audience can be not like geo specific because
Hmm.
no longer are you beholden to, folks in your city, in a brick and mortar space, in a theater or where have you, a stage, but you're having, the ability to tap into folks who can, chime in digitally. But then at the same time, for some of these IRL experiences, real life experiences on
Hmm.
site at an exhibition space, you can't gather in crowds. So there's a lot of time tickets and,
Hmm.
people kind of potting up to experiencing things in limited capacity. And
Hmm.
so how are you thinking that might impact the way you curate or the way that you host public programs? Or how do you imagine kind of navigating around that and what the future might hold for audiences?
That's something I really have trouble wrapping my mind around because um certainly COVID has shifted the way we do just about every single thing in our lives, from seeing art to, even, dating was complicated for a while with COVID, like
Was
it's
complicated.
yeah. It's just the way we sort of it's shifted so much in our world, and I'm still having trouble seeing what the other side will be, and I feel very much just still in a space of being watchful. I do think, and I think you brought this up, I do think and I'm hopeful, and maybe that's what I've been clinging on to since the beginning of this, is that the sort of in-person experience will always sort of trump the virtual experience. I feel like virtually, I mean, it's compelling. I feel like but our sphere of competition virtually, like, suddenly, you're not talking about, do I, go to the Village or the Barnes or AMP or to my favorite gallery or the Kimmel
Mhm.
Center or wherever you go to consume your art. That virtual space, it seems like then your competition is like suddenly you're battling Issa Rae and Netflix and and HBO and
Right.
Insecure
It's
and like
like
Lord of
when
the
you get to
Rings
the
for the
screens, anything goes.
that screen is sort of endless, and so I don't know. I have aspirations. I hope that, as much as we shift and this sort of possibility has opened up, that and there's a lot happening within my organization around online learning and the arts that's opened up a lot of possibilities for audiences. I will say on the curatorial, programmatic art side, I am holding strong and fast to, that we can keep real life arts entertainment. Like this like the timbre of someone's voice spoken or song in person, it just it has a different resonance than it can almost ever have coming through your laptop, your speakers. And so I don't know,
Yeah.
I find myself grasping desperately, or at least diligently, to in-person programming and wanting to keep that space sort of viable and valuable.
No, I feel you. I'm with you on that one. I'm more desperate. I feel like I just, it's so challenging for me because I think that we forget that not everybody is comfortable interfacing with technology. So, maybe one of your really escapes was going to a museum in real life,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
when you lose that, when you lose the thing that might have given you peace or, brought you joy, and then you're forced to kind of go online to now get that, but the online thing doesn't agree with you,
Yeah.
it can really impact people's lives. Like, I think that we're finding more and more, and we still don't know how all of this shifting to
Hmm.
this digital space has changed and impacted folks. I mean, because look, the studies will be showing soon how it's affecting these children, the children who have
Yeah.
just grown up, and the babies born at this time, and what all that means. But in addition to like the audience, and you've talked a little bit about the curatorial process, but also just about the staff, like thinking about, what who would be the essential team members for a gallery or exhibition space of the future, because I feel like there's so many things that we can maybe anticipate that will be needed, and
Hmm.
maybe even things that might be obsolete, may no longer be needed,
Yeah.
due to the shifting sands of time. you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think as much as we're trying to downplay technology, I think having someone who is a master of technology, is valuable. Someone, because there's so much interesting things happening with digital media and film, and photography, and so I sort of feel like the that media person, even envisioning what the space could be, I think is really valuable. Um, I haven't been to the Village in quite some time, so I am sort of wondering, thinking about his relationship with community, and I imagine what I know is that there's some real long-standing depth there, and so but I'm wondering about sort of just the folks who greet you at the door, the folks who guide you in the space, the folks who also sort of protect the space and protect the art, who talk to you about what you're seeing, that person, um, is really interesting to me because they're the person um, who sometimes makes or breaks whether that person will return.
That's true.
I
Your frontline staff is very important.
Yeah, I remember going to see the Michelle Obama portrait, the Obama portraits, and I was standing in the gallery that held the Michelle Obama's portrait. And I'm,
Right.
and yeah, so I'm looking at the portrait, I'm trying to take it in. The gallery attendant was standing there, African American woman, a little younger than me. And so she sees me, I see her, I'm looking at it, it's the first time seeing it. Prior to that, I had only seen the image sort of digitally. So I'm taking in sort of
Right.
the way the color rests on the natural eye versus the digital screen. And
Right.
I remember looking over at the gallery attendant and saying like, you like it? And she was like, I love it. And I was like, why? And then she knew that painting through and through and started
Wow.
telling me all this sort of nuance. And as at some point, folks sort of gathered around, and this moment that was between the two of us became like, a little mini
Oh,
talk
wow.
for
Yeah, a
her.
little tour, a little mini
And
tour.
and I really appreciated that. I also sort of appreciated, the this may or may not be appropriate for whatever gets recorded, but it's a good
Yeah, but
story.
please tell.
Um, an older white woman steps between the guard and I, and like so now not only are there's like a group of folks gathered, there's like someone who's sort of in between this sort of A to B conversation that was sort of happening. And the woman, the guard, like the gallery attendant was talking, and then she stops when she sees this woman that's like stood right in front of my face, and
Yeah.
she goes, I forget what she says. It was something like, I'm sorry. And the woman that was like, oh yeah, I'm fine. And then she sort of realizes what she's done and she steps to the
Right.
side, and then it continues. And all that to say, oh, how deeply seen I felt in that moment. And I'm someone who's very
Mm.
comfortable in whatever space. I'm like, you will not deny me my comfort and my
Right.
and the autonomy I feel to like to enter spaces. Like I don't have that issue.
I
Um,
know that's
but
right.
but I know a lot of folks do, and I'm like, it just seems so important to me that she saw me taking in this painting. She
Mhm.
knew how important it was for us as two African American folks to have this conversation
That,
about,
yeah.
the aesthetic and the history of this piece and what it's saying.
Wow.
And she even saw, and in that moment also sort of protected, sort of my gallery experience,
Right.
and so I don't know, that attendant,
No,
I
that's
think, and
that's
that gallery
special.
guide, as not just as an ambassador, as a protector of the things that are on the wall,
Hmm.
but also as someone who can invite you in, can hear you and hear your perspective, and also share a little bit of their perspective. I
Yeah.
think those sort of folks are key, and I think there are a lot of, like, when I think about some of the way that I think what I read was talking about creating some infrastructure that could create pipelines into the arts. I feel like
Yes.
this is a position that that could create comfortability in talking about work. This is like
Mhm.
that gallery attendant has the ability to sort of leap from, it's like the leap from the security guard to the curator. I think
Yeah.
there's a bridge sort of there too that could be
Yes.
really interesting.
Yes,
Or to the
indeed.
educator. I don't know.
Right, right. No, for sure, because that is definitely a goal for the village, is to create opportunities, professional opportunities for youth, for the community through this
Hmm.
space, whether it's as an art handler, or installer, doing installations and building, installations and whatnot for the space and the artist. But like you said, as an educator, as a curator, I think the installation piece is just the beginning. Like learning those skills is a place to
Yeah.
start. But like
Yeah.
you said, like even having a robust kind of like internship program where you
Hmm.
learn these skills, fellowships and whatnot,
Yeah.
where folks, or you can duplicate whole staff, and that's amazing. And I think that one of the things I'm interested to hear from you, because one of the last questions from folks that I had for folks is around thinking about that what if question, right? Like that's something that is utilized as a kind of iconic prompt in science fiction. and thinking about tomorrow, like what if? And there's so many what ifs that we're facing right now. And you think about the work of, say, Octavia Butler, who's one of her most resonant works, Parable of the Sower, which you already talked about. You know, a lot of what went into that story and what made it so real to life was because she was building off of what she saw around her in the present day, you know, and then she thought about all these things, the issues that she saw around her, and then said, okay, well, what if this continues down the road, you know? And in thinking about that, you know, are there any worlds that are portrayed in science fiction and whether it's literature or film, you know, that for you have presented worlds or realities that you think are close to where we may be headed in the future? And you can take a minute to think of the films, you know, it could be television shows, but any realities that come to mind from the speculative fiction and how that might relate to where you think we might be headed.
I don't know. I'm sort of like drawing a blank here in terms of something
Well,
thoughtful, meaningful.
I can help you.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe like
yeah, give
what
you
are you
some
thinking?
ideas. Well, here's the thing, right? This is one of the challenges that I've heard from other folks is that
Hmm.
a lot of the realities presented in speculative fiction are dystopian, right? They don't really
Hmm.
paint a very positive future. And so it's hard
Yes.
to, you know, think about that. But, you know, for me, like, for example, someone mentioned Lovecraft Country and
Hmm.
thinking about, you know, I guess in, was it Tulsa? Where there was like an exhibition space or a museum that was talking about
Hmm.
folks' ancestry. Because it's like this exercise of kind of imagining the world of tomorrow is also thinking about how a gallery space, an art space would be situated within that world, right? And because when you think about you know, just think about a world that might be deeply impacted by climate change, you know, or an economic collapse of some kind. You know, how would a gallery and art space survive? Because we think about, you know, essential workers, we think
Hmm.
about these things that would still need to be up and running, like
Hmm.
hospitals and things like that. But for me, I feel like the art space is definitely an essential space for community, and especially when you think about it in the context of the village and how they're so community minded, so community centered, you can imagine that in a time of crisis down the line in the future, that this gallery could be a hub for survival in a lot of ways, for regeneration, for rebirth in a
Hmm.
civilization that might require a new way of being, you know. But I know it's hard because it's just like, it's so, sometimes right now it's so hard to even think beyond this moment that we're in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking, I mean, you're right. I think that's where I hit the first wall was like everything is dystopian.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is where my mind goes. I think about the icebox space at the Crane Arts Building,
Hmm.
and that like that white box that feels different every time I'm in it, like
Hmm.
depending on what happens there. I mean, it literally feels like sometimes it feels so massive. It feels like it could
Right.
contain a football field. Sometimes
Right.
I've been on risers and I feel like I'm in an intimate black box. Sometimes it's like, you know, it feels like the warehouse it probably was at one point. Like it there's so much versatility in that space, and there's something about the blank slate and the ability to sort of reset that blank slate. And I feel
Hmm.
like a lot of at least a few things I've watched, like I think Raised by Wolves or something on HBO.
Oh yeah, the Ridley Scott piece.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
just watched something else and I can't recall what I watched. But I feel like so much of it is like humanity is starting from scratch, and
Yeah.
we are the last two people who are like holding on to the records that, you know, someone has deemed important for us, and
Right.
sent us to restart. And I have no idea what that means in terms of this space, but there is something I think about the world of possibilities I see within Icebox and sort of like
Yeah,
the pieces I'm watching about dystopian futures where people sort of are starting again. And so I feel like maybe maybe it's just the range of possibilities that are available that, you
yeah,
know, that the like, and perhaps it's just that like the it's not a static space. It can be
right,
what we need it to be, and it has been designed to be that. I think so
right,
often we design things and we just will live with them in perpetuity, right? You know, like this is the way we designed it, and it's just this is what the building is. And I'm like,
right,
well, but if we design something that if we what if we design with the hope that that space can be reactive, you know, accommodating, flexible, versatile, you know, that sort of the space can be anything we need it to be. What would that
right.
space look like? And I'm thinking about Icebox as just a space. I'm like, I feel like whenever I'm in that space, it is what I needed it to be.
No, I agree. I agree. And Icebox has come up before because I interviewed one of my former students, Logan Cryer,
Mhm.
who just has a show up at Vox right now, but also worked with Tim over at Icebox for Killjoy's Castle and a few other exhibitions. But I don't know if you got to see the one on climate change. I can't recall the title of the exhibition now, but the
Oh,
one where there was like
equators.
5 inches of water. What was it called?
Oh wait, no. I thought you were talking about this performer just did something there called Equators that was also about sort of the environment and
Oh
climate change.
no, I missed that one. You definitely get out, James. You get to
I
see your
try
art.
to. I try to.
But yeah, no, but it was crazy because this was about they kind of like showing the map of Philadelphia and if we got flooded, right? If the sea levels rose, what would happen in the future of climate
Yeah.
change, you know, for this particular city and our geography and looking at the topography, no, not topography, but you know what I mean, the landscape, okay, and looking at the levels and everything, and then showing like your neighborhood. So you would go up and put like a tack on where your neighborhood would be, and you would see how much of your neighborhood would be submerged in water, or if you're on high ground or low ground. But the interesting thing is that you literally had to put on rain boots. You had to put on rain boots to go in there because the water, there was like at least 6 inches of water in the ground, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they had filled the entire gallery with
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
And things were floating around, like there were messages in bottles that were floating around. You could leave a message in a bottle to somebody. It was incredible, but I was just like, wow, the fact that they even thought that was possible, that they could seal things off and put down the tarp and figure it out and really achieve that. Like you said, you know, really shape shifting a space and making it malleable, making it adaptable to whatever vision is really a part of what a space of the future would need to be. I
I
would
think
think.
so. And it to me, it also seems that a decision can be made to create a space that prioritizes people and art and opportunity and connection over space. Like sometimes we create the space and then the space becomes the most important precious thing. It becomes the thing to
Right.
be protected and cleaned and reset and like it like, oh, the
Mhm.
space, you know, and like and then sometimes the space becomes more precious than the people that are drawn to it, and that sounds compelling to me. Hearing what you're saying, it's like, oh, this is a space that values this opportunity to explore climate change and create something meaningful
Yeah.
in a way, you know, that someone's made a design decision or at least a use decision about a space that has allowed for that sort of dexterity and
Yes,
and isn't
dexterity,
that beautiful?
dexterity in design. I like that. I love that. That's really a good place. That's a great place to end, actually, because
Okay.
that was really my last question. The only follow up is that
Yeah.
you've kind of already mentioned a couple of things, like you referenced that book on Black research methodologies or something, like anything that we've mentioned in the conversation, because I'm going to, as you know, I've recorded this, and one of my things that I'm going to do, part of my process is to review the interviews, kind of pull out some of the sound bites and things, like some of the resonant things that we shared, and references and recommendations you may have given. And then if there's anything else that you can think of, or even people. So for example, this is just my first round. Like I said, you're my 6th interview. I have 2 more to go in this round. And then I'm going to process the information and figure out, like, maybe where are some of the gaps of, like, things that we didn't get to discuss in this first round that we want to talk about, emergent ideas that came up amongst the folks that might have, lead me in another direction in terms of the inquiry. So if you can think of anyone, I mean, it doesn't just have to be a curator or even an artist, but we're also looking at folks that might have some insight on the design of spaces, who might even have some insight on the future of Blackness. Maybe it's just like an Afrofuturist, who might do a whole bunch of different things, who knows, but anything that comes to mind, let me know. And just so you know too, I just found out the other day though, that it looks like we're going to be processing everyone's payment at the same time. Okay. So your wait time will be less because you're kind of at the tail end, but okay. I have 2 more interviews to go midweek next week. And then once I do that, I'm going to submit everybody's W-9s at the same time. And then, it'll take the time after that. But if anything, no invoice is required. I found that out as well. So just your W-9 2022. And you can send that to me when you can. And also don't forget the media release. And note too, I just realized that it might have a different title on it that I didn't change. I didn't realize, I thought they were blank, but you might see something that says Care Not Control, but just know that it's going to be recovering, recovery, imagination, whatever the title we're calling this, Futures Gallery, we're going to update that just so you know. Okay. But I know you've agreed, and thank you so much. And thank you for your time and your insight. It was so great to talk to you.
No, it's just cool talking to you, whenever. I got paid to talk to Lisa.
Yes, right, exactly.
I won.
And look, James, you better keep me abreast. I want to know, I want to go out. I want to see the world. Yeah. Let me know what's going on too. Hey, what's going on at the Barns coming up? Anything?
First Friday. Have you heard Limo's thing yet?
No, Limo.
Limo is a jazz and soul vocalist.
Look, I'm all the way out the loop, James. Let's just be clear about that.
And she's doing our First Friday. So if you want to come to First Friday, of course, you're welcome to come to First Friday. We'll have some opening. We're doing a show of Native artists that will be coming up soon. Let's see.
So then what's the deal? Are people like, you got to show a vax card? What's the deal at the door?
Yeah, you got to be vaccinated. So that's the deal.
Okay, but then once you're in, is everyone masking up?
Yeah, everyone's so First Friday is so generally they remove food from the barns, and so everyone's wearing a mask. First Friday we will make an exception. So we have an area that's stanchioned off, and if you are in that area and you want to eat and drink, almost like a restaurant without your mask, you're welcome to. And then we have but if you're in the galleries or if you're ahead of that stanchion or outside of that stanchion area, then you're required to keep your mask on at all times.
Okay. But it's not a time ticket or anything. It's just like come one, come all kind of thing?
For First Friday?
Yeah.
Yeah, First Friday is from 6 to 9 p.m. So yeah, whatever time. There's 2 sets of music and open gallery. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's time to get back out in the world, James. I mean, that's because we're gonna be living with COVID. It's here. It's not going anywhere.
It's here. So
we might as well get used to it.
I was always sort of not necessarily wilding, but I was, I was living my life during COVID.
I know. I wish I had been doing a little bit more. Did you ever get it or no?
Yeah, I just got it in the. And
that's right.
I literally just had it. But my mom got it too, and she was unvaccinated, which was like,
oh no.
So she was in the hospital for like a week.
Oh no.
she's home recovering. She's feeling stronger, but she's still like she's 70, so she's so weak, you know,
It's
and
so
like
scary. I know, I'm so scared. I
I
mean,
think she's
but
still scared.
but did you were your symptoms bad?
No, it was like a flu, you know. I felt
It
bad for
wasn't
like
bad.
no, I felt bad for 2 days and then, you know, got right back to life. It's it took my mom down though. Took her
Yeah,
down
I know.
really
Look,
hard.
I know we're praying. I'm so glad she's feeling better
Me
though, and you
too. I
just
was like
keep
so
your eye on
nervous.
her. I
I was so
know.
nervous, you know, but
Whew. But look, yeah, we gonna keep on keeping on, man. So in the meantime,
absolutely.
if I don't see you this Friday, hopefully I'll see you soon out in the world for sure.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
I'm still getting myself together. But thank you so much. And
Thank you, friend.
yeah, I'll be in touch. I'll shoot you an email and just in case there are any updates with the payment and stuff. But otherwise, yeah,
Okay.
I'll look for your stuff and I'll be seeing you soon.
All right, Lee. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, bye.